Teachers who ended up working at schools that you attended as a student. What behind the scenes secrets, dirt, or teachers lounge gossip did you learn that you were clueless of as a student? All the staff hated the deputy principal as much as the students did, if not more. The biggest surprise for me was that the teacher I adored as a kid is actually a douche. I loved him as a teacher when I was 14 years old, but I can't stand him as a colleague. We recently discovered that my girlfriend's teacher, who would occasionally break down crying during class when the kids were being particularly childlike, was dealing with cancer during that time. Mrs. X, who was always the jerk AP English teacher, she hated the more inappropriate parts of our AP English books. Turns out her husband cheated on her and she was in the middle of an unpleasant divorce. No wonder she couldn't stand any intercourse in famous literature. I'm not sorry for feeling she was a jerk, but boy, did it make a lot more sense. Marriages and divorces, depressions, cancers, all of that crap about the teachers that you sometimes suspected but never really knew for sure. Also, teachers can be ruthless when talking about kids, but it's funny as heck. Drinking wine with some of my former teachers was freaking weird, but 100% would recommend. I found out the school I work at has a decommissioned shooting range in the basement. That they have a secret basement. My school did, and there was a rumor that there was a tunnel as well that connected the high school to the one across the road. Two guys from our drum line found the secret basement and ended up getting suspended because of it. Was supposed to be a secret, but the entire band knew. My mom did her student teaching at the Catholic high school she attended. She didn't know that, while she'd been away at university, one of her favorite teaching nuns had left the order and gotten married. She almost had a heart attack when she recognized Sister Mary Irony in the halls one day and realized she had a solid 7-month pregnant belly. Rampant smoking. When I was in junior high, I got to keep a project in the teacher's lounge and for a week was treated to the permanent cloud of smoke that hung in it. Everybody except the gym teachers smoked like chimneys. In between periods, they'd run to the lounge for a quick drag or two and dash back to their rooms. I have no idea how they managed after smoking in public buildings was banned. Not a teacher, but my mom is a teacher at a school I went to and I still learned a few things. Two things come to mind. The kinda reserved science teacher has full sleeve tattoos. That was a bit of a surprise. Every year the school does a raffle with a bunch of cool little items in it. I found out recently that it's rigged to go to a poor student. I mean, I'm not complaining, but I always really wanted to win it. I was shocked when I found this out. I work in IT at my old school district. All the teachers are just as immature as the students they teach, and most of the nicer teachers turn out to be dongs and horrible to work with. Also, everything is political and cliquey. I interned at my old elementary school and subbed at the high school. Honestly wasn't as wild and debaucherous as some folks wish it to be. Biggest revelations. My old music teacher would fall asleep during after school meetings and professional development with regularity. Sweet 4th grade teacher actually took no crap during after school meetings if someone was trying to push policy or curriculum that made no sense. High school teachers would gossip and teachers lounge about students, though generally only occasionally in passing, and not always scandalous gossip. Just generally more aware of each student's social life than I'd have ever imagined they'd be. An example would be something like, "How's Steve been today? Turned in his homework but it was incomplete. Didn't really participate today. Heard he and Kristen weren't really talking anymore. Yeah, seems to be going through a rough time now but I think he's going to be better off in the long run." In hindsight it was weird to consider that these folks were likely talking about me and my personal life in various regards a few years prior. Always assumed my life in school was relatively insular, but teachers see a lot more than we think. My 3rd grade teacher was killed when her car got her stuck on the train tracks. Her husband was the principal. After I found out through parents that everyone was starting to suspect that the principal was seeing one of the teacher's aides. It was one of those uncomfortable things where a lot of the moms were after him because he was single and so they were incredibly jealous and petty towards this particular aide. Years later, I found out the principal and this aide got married. Years after that when they were both gone, I started working with my old elementary school, and that's when I found out the truth. that the aide and principal had started having an affair back when my 3rd grade teacher was still alive. She found out about their affair and her death was not an accident. She was actually on the phone with the aide when she purposely drove her car onto the train tracks and killed herself. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school, a female student's nude had been discovered on a flash drive that a male teacher gave to students if they didn't have a flash drive so they could work on projects at home if necessary. Obviously an investigation went underway and it was found that another student had put the nude on the flash drive. But amidst all the chaos and rampant rumors, it was discovered that the male teacher was having an affair with one of the social studies female teachers, who was also married. Male teacher is still currently with his wife while the female SS teacher divorced her husband, thinking that male teacher was leaving his wife for her. You should hear the way teacher talk about students. They are brutally honest in teachers meeting. Not a teacher, but I was an IT technician at my high school about 6 years after I graduated. The staff at the school all share stories about students among each other, so they all knew who was good or bad. They knew who was dating who. They knew all the friend groups. They knew about students' social lives. This isn't stuff they'd ever be told directly, just observations. I swear. They knew more about the class than I ever would have as a student as part of the class. Also, as someone else said, it's actually kind of fun to have a beer or drink with your old teachers. Sometimes the ones you become friends with aren't the ones you ever would have thought would be the case when you were in school. This is kinda related, I'd say. It's about my school rather than the teachers. My high school had a theater and put on one huge production every year, along with smaller things like talent shows and such throughout the year. There was a light and sound crew open to any student that worked on building the sets alongside setting up lights and sound. I was on the crew for a while, and the leader was a teacher director I highly respect, but he was also super chill and a good judge of character, trusting us with keys and access to stuff students would never see. One of my friends who was higher up in the crew unlocked and took us through some tunnels underneath the school. I had no idea that they ran underneath around 75% of the school. Our high school was pretty large, 1,000 plus people. You had to crouch to go through at some points, and there was even a trapdoor from them that was in a janitor's closet attached to a teacher's lounge. It's funny to think that I've walked past the wall the closet was behind so many times and never knew that there was a trapdoor to underground tunnels that I never thought were there. My school had an old lunchroom, an entire portion of the building that was only accessible through 2 doors. I cannot say with certainty that this is true, but rumor has it several teachers ended up turning that room into a suitable living area and slept there for a few months. I didn't think it was that crazy until I remembered at least 2 of those teachers had a history of drug use, LSD, MDMA and coke. What went on in that old lunchroom is anyone's guess. I didn't end up working at my old school, but I did run into my old guidance counselor, who had since moved districts, at a conference. I was mentioning the teachers I had had, and that the photography teacher always creeped me out. He confirmed that said teacher had been quietly fired for sleeping with students, and this was at a school where my AP history teacher was actually married to a former student. Nothing to see here. I was a private school teacher at a school I attended as a student. The school had no infrastructure for special education or IEP students. They basically told parents they could send students there, but they're not getting any additional accommodations. I never connected or understood this as a kid, but every time we'd get a different student, they rarely lasted more than a year. A lot students we'd pass just because we don't want to deal with them anymore, or because their failure would hurt funding and we were pressured to overlook failure of certain students. I taught at a technical school for 1 semester. I was forced to quit when I refused to pass an obviously failing student. The school's director brought me into his office and specifically said that if the student didn't pass, they would lose his tuition and I would be fired if I didn't pass him. I walked out in disgust. My friend and I both did taught at our former high school. He came up to me in the faculty office one morning and said, "Did you know some of the teachers think I went to blowjob parties when I was on the football team? What's a blowjob party? I wish I was going to those." To this day we don't know where they got this idea, or what a blowjob party is. Not the same school, but an old teacher. Whilst in year 10, my language teacher and a PE teacher were having a secret relationship despite everyone knowing they were both in a relationship with other people. Whilst doing my teacher training at a different school, I saw her briefly in the staff room. Later I caught up with someone else who worked there and said how I knew her. Found out that she actually married this PE teacher a couple of years before and was having an affair with another PE teacher in that school. Fast forward to going into my third of teaching. At the interview for the school I currently work at, speaking to another guy at the interview, and he told me which school he was leaving and it was my old secondary school. I asked him if he knew my old language teacher and the gossip of her, and he said he knew they weren't together anymore. The day goes on. I just finish having a tour of the school, walk into the staff, and there she was, sat there on her laptop. Turns out she had also recently been employed there. Some PE teachers came in, also on their interview, and she made a beeline for the young male who was clearly about to start teaching. She clearly has a type. Not me, but one of my best friends. We attended high school together and she eventually ended up teaching in that school. My friend was asked who was the valedictorian in our batch. She mentioned girl A. The teacher can't remember her, so my friend said she's not into extracurricular that much, so you might not remember her, but you may remember our top 2 inches. Then mentioned the name our of batch's top 2, to which the teacher blurted out, oh yeah, I remember her, that B, and to her mother. Together with your advisor harassed me to change her grades so she can make it top 1. I'm a student teacher, but not at the school I attended. However, I am teaching in an area that I am very familiar with. I find out a lot of sad things about students, stuff like who's on suicide watch, and who is a 504/IEP. I also find out who all the teachers hate in their team. I never really paid attention to any of that when I was in school, and I lived in a privileged area. This experience is seriously eye-opening. Also, I learned that a lot of teachers don't follow the law when it comes to grades and deadlines. Adults aren't very different from children. I wasn't a teacher, but part of school management. The school has a door with a sign saying, "Open pit. If you open the door and walk forward, you'll fall into a pit." The year after I graduated, 4 teachers were suspended from teaching for a few months, including the psych teacher who was one of my favorites. The school didn't really announce why, just that they would be suspended. They came back to teaching there later when the suspension was up. When I started subbing there a few years later, I found out that they had been bullying another teacher for being gay. I lost a lot of respect for my psych teacher after I learned that. Not a teacher at my old school, but I did find out over a decade later that there was a secret shelter under the school property that you could access through a creepy ass tunnel under the stage in the theater. It was set up like a little lounge and only the most artsy of students ever got to go in there. Also, my history law teacher took pretty much every female teacher in that school to Pound Town. Oh man, I've definitely got one. I worked in the same department as my old teacher, one of the people who made me want to be a teacher. It was pretty cool. One day we're at a bar and he's telling me his biggest horror stories and mentions a girl that I knew from high school. Turns out she was selling BJs during class under the stairs. We only found out because she confessed it to my co-teacher. Apparently some kids had not paid her and she was really upset about the whole ordeal, and she thought my colleague would be the only one who would listen. He was quite shocked, to say the least. She was right, and he worked with the right counselors in the school to get her back on track and deal with some trauma. It never really spread around the school and I walked with her when I graduated. It was another checkmark on the list of why I looked up to him as a teacher though, and I try to be as open about listening to my students now. I work at the private high school I went to, and the way the principal talks about past students was disgusting. She'd make fun of kids, talking about how they weren't popular, didn't have friends, stuff like that. Also, the boys club thing is rampant. Women do all the work while their male superiors take all the credit. A ton of coaches drink with students and don't get in trouble at all. Didn't go back as a teacher, but learnt from another teacher who I met in the pub that my year 9 chemistry teacher is a less interesting Walter White. I supply at the elementary school I went to for 12 years. The married with children female principal was having an affair with the married with children male grade 4 teacher. She decided to inform the staff of their relationship 6 months into her pregnancy and about 3 months after she left her husband. They moved after the end of that year. Her name was Ms. Dong. The principal before her had embezzled $100K from the school before the new secretary realized, and he was asked to quietly retire. This place typifies my neighborhood. I can't go into too much detail, but one teacher in particular has a substance abuse problem and had drawers full of narcotics they do at school. I always thought he was a douchebag, but students think he's cool. He's not. He hangs out with students. He's like in his 50s hanging out with 20-year-olds. He still lives with his parents and is single. I supply taught at the school I went to. I regularly supplied for my grade 6 teacher. What I learned is that some of the teachers are so rude. I was in the staff room eating my lunch when the French teacher came in, looked at me and asked, "Are you the supply that was in for me on Friday?" I said no. She proceeded to make fun of the supply that was actually in for her, saying that she carried all her papers around to each class instead of using the cart that prep teachers use. Then she said, I know it was her first supply day, but come on, the cart was right beside my desk. Should have been obvious, yeesh. A bit separate, but I had a teacher once that was awful if you ran into her in the hallways. She seemed super authoritarian. I got placed in her math class the last year and I was really nervous. Turns out she was one of the best teachers I've ever had and super understanding. She once said she wanted people to think she was a hard ass when they come into her class so they would take it seriously. After college UK, I spent a year as a teacher assistant in the primary school I used to go to when I was little. Most of the teachers were still there from when I was at school and all of the dinner ladies still worked there too. The dinner ladies were still as sweet and kind as I remember and made me feel so welcome as a member of staff. The teacher I hated when I was at school was actually incredibly competent and encouraged me to use my IT skills to improve her classroom activities and got me to start up a lunchtime club where we did basic typing and computing skills. The flip side is that they all drank heavily outside of school. Staff evenings out were a hilarious mixture of drunken adventures, pub crawls and oversharing. One night, which I didn't attend due to a prior engagement, they all went skinny dipping. I'm quite glad I didn't see that. I am a student with a teacher for a parent, and apparently my principal used to smoke pot regularly, and one of the teachers and the elementary school secretary cheated on their respective spouses with one another. The amount of gossip going around about students and other teachers. Oh, this is a good one. I realized that my first grade teacher, who I adored, was the butt of all the other teachers' jokes, and that our principal, who I also adored, was actively trying to get her fired. You see the other end of the environment. Burnout, negativity, factions and cliques. IDK. You kind of assume as an elementary school student that your teachers that preach kindness, cooperation, etc. also do that with the people around them, but I've learned that sometimes teachers are worse than the kids. Not a teacher, but, well, I discovered it accidentally. In my high school, in France, teachers have something like a betting hall with a student scoreboard. Teachers bet some money for which students get the baccalaureate or not. Years later, an old teacher of mine confirmed when I worked here as a tutor that they continue to bet, but they add some news games about that, but he was evasive. The year I passed this examen, it was a hard year. Lot of urban riots for BS reasons, and the CRS, Republican security companies were constantly here to prevent any new violence. The baccalaureate here get a failure rate around 72% and the teacher told me it was a good surprise that I managed to get it with mention. He also told me because I succeed, I make him lose 25 euros. Here's Bob Ross holding a baby raccoon to brighten your day. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and comment. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.